Well, not too bad outside today, but certainly a little nicer in the greenhouse. And today it's our annual Get Your Tools in Shape segment. I do it every year because I think it's a really important thing. A thing that people don't think about a lot is that these have to be sharp. And in my case, this is my grandfather's hoe. I never knew my grandfather, but this was his from the 1930s. And you see how I take care of my tools. I don't do the best job at it, but twice a year I'm doing this job, and it's kept this really nice old ash handle in at least decent shape. Dried out now, but we're going to fix that. First thing we're going to do, this is for hoes, for shovels, for trowels, anything with a flat, sharp edge, is just to take my AccuSharp tool here and run it right across the edge. I've been doing this, it's well over 20 years that I've had one of the AccuSharp tools, and I really didn't understand how important it was to have sharp tools until I did a speaking gig for some sheet metal workers who were telling me, how do you sharpen your tools? I said, I never do. And he goes, do you know how easy it's going to be to do your garden work when they're sharp? And it's so right. So the AccuSharp does the trick, especially on these tough edges here. And you can start to see that it's making a nice edge on here. And we'll keep working on that. I'm going to put this down here. There we go. And I can see that it's scraping a little bit off there. And it does make life so much easier for shovels, hoes, and anything with a flat edge like that. There we go. That's pretty good. Okay. Now the handle. I always use boiled linseed on the handles. And you're just going to see me do 1 or 2 coatings on here, but I'm going to let that soak in, and then I will let this sit here, and I will put on 2 or 3 more coatings. I always tell this story. One time I was discussing this and telling somebody, use boiled linseed oil, and it was actually a group, and somebody raised their hand and said, how long do you boil it for? I'm like, no, you just buy it as boiled linseed oil. I use it for woodworking. And you can just see how that handle, it just soaks in the oil. This will keep the handle from cracking. You can't get an ash handle anymore. Most of our ash trees are gone due to the emerald ash borer, which is sad, but we'll, like I said, do this a few times and be sure that oil soaks in. This makes the handle more supple. It won't crack, hopefully. And most of my grandparents' tools I've been able to keep going. Every once in a while I'll lose a handle, but I can replace that. And as long as the metal part is still good, which we're going to work on next, they're good to go. And like I said, I didn't know my grandfather, but I knew this was his hoe. All right. And the next thing we'll work on is just how to preserve the working end, the business end. My boss thinks that's funny when I say the business end of a tool, but that's what we call it. All right, boy, that's really soaking in that oil. That might need 3-4 coats over the next few days. And it also protects it from any water. Okay, now the metal is just a different type of oil. It's just a standard motor oil. And we just give a thin coating on the business end. And that just will keep it from rusting. Rusting more. No avoiding that when it's from the 1930s, I'm afraid. Okay. This will only need 1 coat. I don't want to use too much of this oil. There we go. All right. Now, when we're talking about sharpening other things, and especially bypass pruners, we'll do those next. Those are sharpened a little bit differently. Let me finish up here and we'll get to that next. So this is what we call a bypass pruner. That means that the blades bypass each other when it cuts. They're my favorite type. If we had what we call anvil pruners, and I don't use them, it just means the blade comes down onto an anvil. You could use the AccuSharp, or in this case it's called auger sharp, but they're all basically the same for a garden tool or a knife. You could use that on that, but since these blades only have one side, I just use a sharpening stone, just like I did back in the 70s when I was a Boy Scout. And all I'm going to do is just see how that angle is. I'm just going to follow that angle. I've got two sides, a fine and a coarser angle. I'm using the fine. And these are called Dram Color Point shears, and they are my absolute favorites. Actually, because one thing, they're yellow, I can find them. The other thing, that little locking mechanism never locks open, never locks closed. It's always in the right position when you need to do it. And this is pretty sharp. And I'm just going to run that a couple times. That's all there is to it. And keeping your tools sharp, keeping the handles oiled will basically make them last forever. Whenever you buy a garden tool, you should be thinking that you're going to be, like me, you're going to be passing it down to your grandchildren, hopefully, and they'll think of you when they're using that. Okay, that's all there is to it. We're going to finish up. Be sure to check me out online. There's lots more garden information there, stories, videos, blog posts, etc. And of course, where you can become a member of my Seed of the Month Club. I would love for you to join. Until next week, I'm going to work on the rest of Grandpa's tools and get them in shape. Imagine the stories this old tree spade could tell. We'll see you next week.